Yeah, man, keep blowing, man. Sound good. Call me.
Casting over the shoulder on a boat.
But I think one of the things I wanted to point out today is if you're a right-handed caster and you're fishing to the left-hand bank, it's no problem. It's your standard fly cast that you're used to making. But you're not always going to be fishing to that bank. So instead of making an overhead cast, which puts your guide in danger and maybe your fishing partner in danger, you're going to have to learn to cast over your opposite shoulder, okay? And it's really, the cast is no different. Everything stays the same. You're still pointing with your thumb, okay? It's just that instead of going over this shoulder, you're just coming over this shoulder. Oh, there was a fish. So
figured that would happen.
Everything stays the same. You're just pointing the cast over this shoulder. I'm still hauling. I'm doing everything the same. I start low, I get it moving, just come over this shoulder, drop the rod tip back a little bit, and then come forward and point with your thumb just as you normally would. What a lot of people try to do is they try to twist their hand around and try to open up their hand as if they were casting this way, and that's just not the case. So, and you can actually practice this in your backyard. Just stand in one spot and cast hard to your left, and then stand in that same spot and cast hard to your right over that opposite shoulder. In this case, would be my left shoulder. So start low, get it moving, stop, drop your rod tip back, and I'm hauling, of course, as I do on virtually every fly cast that I ever make. The other thing about fishing with these sink tip and intermediate lines, I know I've said this so many times, but it's so critical, is that you've got to keep the rod tip at or even in the water. So many times during the course of the day today, my rod tip has been in the water, okay? You're just gonna get so much better retrieve, the line's gonna sink better, and you have much more feel for when the fish hits. If you don't have your rod tip in the water, it's not as straight a line. You'll see I've got that belly there. You don't strip the fly as well. The line comes up and slaps the water. You could be letting the fish know that you're there doing that, and you just don't have as straight a line. In this style of fishing, it's always best to have as straight a line as you can between your rod tip and the fly.
The feel of the rod and fly lines with Flip Palette.
I'm circling the wagons around Flip's Mangrove Coast rod, as you should be. He, like Lefty, have that feel thing about how the whole setup should work in that sweet spot. Seems he was able to convey it to TFO, and they produced it in the Mangrove Coast. Besides the rod, Flip also has his fingerprints on the Cortland High Vis Flip line, probably another feel thing again. I'm thinking this line is what he had in mind for the Mangrove Coast sweet spot. So my question for you and Flip, do you think that the Mangrove Coast action is best suited for that one size heavier, shorter headed, bass bug taper type of fly line? And would a line like the Scientific Angler's Titan taper or bass bug taper, which are both 2 sizes heavy, or the Cortland Compact series, would these be overloaded for the Mangrove's design intent? Thank you for your time. All the best.
All the best.
All the best.
A lefty line.
Tom Billicon has done his homework.
Yes.
All the best, Tom Billicon. So Tom, First of all, thanks again. We really appreciate it. And so the question is, first, do you think that the Mangrove Coast Action is best suited for that one size heavier, like the Cortland High-Vis flip line?
Yeah, I would say that in the design of that rod and in the design of the high-vis Cortland line, I tried to stay as close in line weight to the original line weight specs that have been time honored in the industry for years and years and years, and still remain competitive because those numbers have changed. Those designations have changed, probably as the result of new components in rods. Rods being made out of graphite have changed everything. So, I mean, they're much more resilient, higher modulus, I mean, on and on and on. So, in answer specifically to the question, the line and the rod were designed to be closer to the old original specs. It would be very easy to overload a rod with the action of the Mangrove Coast. I would stay with as light as possible. With regard to the bass bug thing, many people don't realize exactly what a bass bug taper traditionally is. Traditionally, it was the forerunner of the saltwater taper. So basically a bass bug taper is a saltwater taper. The thing that sets the bass bug taper apart from saltwater tapers is simply that traditionally there's more flotation in a bass bug taper because it's being used in sweetwater or freshwater as opposed to saltwater, which is more dense and floats things higher. So harder to float things in sweetwater, so more micro balloons of air are added to the batter or the coating of a bug taper, a bass bug taper, because it's specifically designed for sweetwater use. The colors are different as well, but the thing that really sets it apart from a standard saltwater taper is more air. They float higher. Actually, in salt water, it's kind of fun using a bug taper because it's so easy to lift up off the water. It actually floats much higher in the saltwater column than a saltwater line does. So, something to think about.
Uncurling, straightening, and storing your leaders.
First and foremost, how do you take a leader, how do you take it out of the package and unravel it, and then maybe put it back into the package that it came in? Or I'm going to talk a little bit about my leader wallet, which I carry with me, and then we'll also talk about one of our best-selling products here in the shop, and that is a leader straightener. Yes, believe it or not, one of the highest grossing items over the past 30 years is a leader straightener. When you take a leader out of the package, okay, whether you're taking it out of the package here or you're taking it out of one of the sleeves here in your leader wallet, it's gonna come coiled up like this. Again, I know this is elementary, I apologize, but I see so many people that mess this up and they wind up getting their leader all tangled up and then they have to throw it away and start over, pull out the next one. I think that's why they sell them in 2-packs. What I do is I kind of put it in between my index, my middle, and my ring finger, usually of my left hand. And you'll automatically see that the butt section, again, the butt section is the thickest part to where you have a loop, typically a loop on there, as opposed to the tippet end, which is the thinnest end to where you're going to attach the fly. So you're simply going to start to undo the wraps of this butt section, okay? Take it slow, undo those wraps of that butt section, and I maybe have one more, and you'll know when it's good to go. And now, I would say actually one more. And now you should be able to just gently undo those coils. And we're gonna go one more. That's why it pays to do this slowly. And then it's simply gonna unroll right off of your fingers without a knot, without any tangles, okay? let me do that one more time with this second one here in the package. Maybe we'll even do it in slow motion. So I undo the coils with the fat end or the butt end. And there we go. That one was a little bit easier, and it comes right out again. No runs, no drips, no errors. Okay, now you'll also notice that it's all coiled up like a slinky or an old telephone cord for those of you that remember telephone cords. A leader straightener. You can take that leader straightener and you can run that leader right through that leader straightener. And look what it did. Took the coils right out. Make sure that you aren't jamming the coils against each other and getting it tangled up while you're doing this. But you can run that right through. Straightens the leader right out. Takes all the coils out. Look at that. It's like magic, or like butter, really. Yes, you can do this with your fingers. You can run that leader through. Okay, let me grab this other one that's sitting right here. And again, I'll always start with the butt section. Less chance of tangling like that. You can run this through your fingers, and the heat generated by your fingers will straighten it out. It doesn't do as good as the leader straightener, you see. I'm gonna have to put quite a bit of pressure on there, and you can run the risk of burning your fingers, burning your hands, and it's gonna be challenging to do in very cold weather. So leader straighteners are not overly expensive. It's a good thing to have in your kit or your vest. I think we carry a couple of different versions. This one from Dr. Slick. I think we carry one from Loon as well. Again, not very expensive. And if you do buy packaged leaders, a leader straightener is probably something you want to have in your kit. So now, when you're putting a leader away, okay, I'm going to do the reverse. I'm going to start at the tippet end. And again, I'm going to go around. This time I usually go around all 4 of my fingers. And I wrap, trying to keep those wraps nice and close to one another. And then once you've got about 10 or 12 inches left, now I'm going to start to coil that butt section or twist that butt section around this coil of leader. Okay? And that's going to keep it from springing out on you and coming loose. And then tuck that final in there, and there you go. It's like it never even happened, although now it's just a little straighter. Your leader can go back in the package if that's how you store it, which is fine. Although eventually, if you're like me, you're probably gonna get one of these leader wallets, okay? And in a future episode, stay tuned, in a future episode, we're gonna give you a tour of what I carry in my leader wallet. But a lot of times I will carry them in the package, but then after I've maybe taken them out of the package, they might be loose. So I just take, these are our product labels that we use here at Mad River Outfitters. So I take those and I mark them, and I've got the leaders that I use most often. And then I've got some furled leaders. I've got some poly leaders. I've got some specific dry fly leaders, nymph leader, which I need to, obviously I need to tie some up. You can just stick that leader back in there, whether it's in the package or by itself. And as long as it's marked, I know what that leader is. And of course, this leader wallet, especially when I'm trout fishing, as you can see there, this leader wallet is always with me, and also one of my most important pieces of gear. Why? Because my leader is my most important piece of gear.
Do I need a leader when I practice casting?
Is people ask when they're practicing casting, do they need a leader? And absolutely you have to have a leader on when you're practicing. Okay, if you don't have a leader on the end of your fly line, you've got this fat pipe, and all of this energy is coming out of that fat pipe, and it's got nowhere to go. So even when you're practicing, yes, you absolutely have to have a leader on there. It should be tapered. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly tapered like you're fishing, but it should have some semblance of taper so that the energy is bled off and you get that feel and that look of an actual fly cast. So when you're practicing, otherwise, you're going to get this big kick. Okay, it's going to kick over and the tip of the fly line is going to kick downward and you're not going to have any loop. You're not going to get a good feel for it. So absolutely, you must have a leader on the end of your line in order to practice your fly casting, which, as we've told you, you've got to practice your casting. You have to practice and then you have to practice some more. You know, I do this for a living and I practice casting most every day of my life when possible, except when it's 9 degrees outside. But then I can use the TFO office rod and practice indoors. Stay tuned on that.
Timing your fly cast with Sean Leader.
So today I'm going to show you guys how to properly cast into the wind and manage the wind. There's a simple method to doing just this. Just imagine a pendulum, okay? You've got a 180 pendulum. In order to throw a line into the wind, you need a straight line. This is your pendulum. This is your arc while you're foils casting. We're gonna call it 10 to 2 for now. Look at the course of my fingertips here. That's a straight line. The one thing that most anglers would do is once they make their false cast and they go to shoot their line, they bring it from a 180 angle and they go straight parallel to the water. So take a look at the tip of my hands again. Here to here. You've already created a wide arc in your line, a wide circle in your line. You can't throw a circle into the wind. You need to form a V. And so that V, the V is created when you're shooting 45 to 45. So your stopping point is always eye level. Look at the tip of my fingers. Eye level. So when you stop it at eye level, the rod flexes forward and you have a straight trajectory to go forward. And I'll show you this with the cast. You get to where your weight forward is, and take a look at the rod tip. 45, 45. You have a straight line. No, so when I go to shoot my line, I just simply stop it at eye level. That carries the entire fly line. I didn't allow the tip to sway from the 45 because the line, if you alter that or if you shake that tip, you create friction in your line, it slows the line down and it alters your cast and the wind gets a hold of it. Stopping it at eye level gives the line a straight trajectory to continue its line speed, and that goes direct to your target. You don't want to alter that line by shaking your tip or even bringing it parallel to the water because it will collapse your cast. So what I normally would see with most anglers is when they'll make beautiful false casts, right? Perfect false casts, perfect casting loops or control loops, I should say. And when they go to finish that cast, they drive their tip all the way to the water and they create a wide arc and it collapses your cast. So in order to make a perfect delivery, just by stopping your rod tip 45 degrees or eye level, that enables the line to have that straight trajectory and you can shoot the entire line. When you're casting, there's 2 pressure points. You pull with your forefinger, stopping at 45, pushing with your thumb at 45, and that's what launches the line. That abrupt stop launches the line for you. Up, push, pull, push, pull, push. So the abrupt stop allows the line to catapult on the zone. It's not absolute power. By using absolute power, you create a wide loop, which is not good. And oftentimes, our adrenaline, when we see our target, we want to rush the cast. No need to do so. It's called calm assertive energy. Deliver the cast with your pressure points. Simple. Flick, 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 and let go.
So there you have it, friends. Straight from Sean Leader, one of my dearest friends for many, many years. And Sean hears it every day of his life when he's out there on the flats. And as he'll say in another episode, you see these people and they're making good false casts, no swooshing sound, and then you go to deliver the fly and it's swoosh. And you push, you drive the rod farther, you open up the loop. So if you hear that swooshing sound, That's your rod tip creating air resistance. You're fighting the environment, and you can't. You've got to back off. And I think Sean called it like a controlled resistance, controlled loop, a nice, smooth, delicate application of power. You don't have to push this thing until it swooshes, okay? As soon as you start hearing that swooshing sound, you're working too hard. I don't care if you're fishing freshwater, saltwater, doesn't matter. Swooshing in your fly cast is bad. Don't swoosh.
Leader length.
Start off and talk about leader length. And so, as a basic guideline, okay, keep your leader length approximately, and I think that means that's a sign for approximately, the length of your rod. Super simple. It's a great place to start, especially for beginners. What does that mean? Infinity or something like that? It's super simple. Couldn't be easier. You can easily remember that. Keep your leader approximately the same length as your rod. And I say approximately, it doesn't have to be perfect. And it's not a rule for all scenarios, but it's a great place to start. And I think many of you will find that in most cases, that's where you're gonna be. That's where you're gonna live. Your leader's gonna be approximately the same length as your fly rod, okay? And again, it's written right on the front of the package how long that leader is. So let's take a look at a couple of things here. First and foremost, 80% of all fly rods are 9 foot in length. Don't quote me on that, but a majority of fly rods that we sell are 9 foot in length, and for good reason. So approximately 7 foot of that is tapered butt section. And this is, of course, where it's going to either loop onto your fly line, or you're going to nail knot or snell knot that onto the tip of your fly line, whichever you prefer. And this is, of course, the thickest end, and it tapers down. And then the last 2 feet or so of a 9 foot leader is going to be what's called your tippet. A leader equals a tapered butt section plus a tippet, and that equals a leader. Okay, so theoretically, a leader is not a leader without a tippet. I mean, if it doesn't have a perfect tippet right out of the package, you still have a tippet. The tippet is the finest diameter. In most cases, we will talk about some situations where you might have a thicker piece, which is called a bite tippet. And then, of course, if you don't have the tapered butt section, you can't just use tippet. You cannot go from the tip of your fly line to the tippet. That's going to create this god-awful, you've got this big pipe this size, your fly line, that's pumping a lot of speed and energy through it, and you attach this thin little piece of tippet, you're going to create this ungodly hinge right there that's not going to cast. It's not going to present. It's not going to cast. It's just going to kick right over. Okay, if you don't believe me, go out and try it, and you'll see that you cannot cast just tippet, not fly cast. In most packaged leaders, okay, this butt section is going to be somewhere in the ballpark of 7 foot, and this tippet is going to be somewhere in the ballpark of 2 foot. Again, it's not a rule, it's not a law, but that's going to make the tippet approximately 20% of the entire length of the leader. And that's a fairly good rule to live by, okay? Keep your tippet somewhere in the 20% ballpark, with the exception of, we'll talk about this, the exception of with sink tips or sinking lines.
6-weight streamer rods with Kelly Gallo.
So Kelly, we're here in Ohio today on the Mad River. I just happened to notice that you're, of course, fishing the Streamer X from Echo, our favorite streamer rod and our best-selling streamer rod, but you're throwing the 6. And I find it interesting. I think I think Pat did some research the other day, and we sell 20-to-1 7-weight over the 6-weight. I love that 6. Talk about why you might want the 6 versus the 7.
For me, and I've said this forever, and when anybody asks, that I fish the 6-weight on foot almost exclusively, because I run it depends a little bit on the water and stuff like that, but on foot, I'm not running big casts. I'm a hunt your water, don't hope it. I'm picking spots, and I want a rod that loads quicker. I mean, I need it to, and I'll still run 250s on these 6-weights. I don't have any problem with that, but I don't get and if I'm standing up and I've got in a boat and maybe I'm stretching it out a little bit further, I generally go to a 7-weight when I'm in a boat. But when I walk fish or in tight water, I need a rod that loads closer. And the 6-weight, and when I say closer, 40 foot still, I mean, there's no problem. You can still reach out with these 6-weights, but they load quicker inside because they're a lighter rod, and it's just easier. You got more control of your fly, and with this, modern 6-weights, the way they load and unload, you can carry a 5-6 inch fly, no problem. And I also, it depends on, like, this river is just not big enough, not enough water depth, not that I would be thinking I was hindered in any way. Matter of fact, anywhere I grew up, when Michigan, I exclusively fished 6-weights.
Right.
And it's just when you get into if I'm in a boat and it's a little bit further, like on the Mad or something like that, Madison, I run 7s, but most of the time if I'm walk fishing, which I do a lot, I'm on a 6-weight.
Well, I find that rod fishes very well with the shorter sink tips. I'm fishing today with the new Scientific Anglers 5-foot tip, and I like it a lot better on the 6.
Yeah.
And I also find that I like that rod better with a floating line. I think that's an overlooked method of fishing, is the floating line system.
And I, as you know, I run a lot of floating lines when I walk, like on the Madison, and I'm not a big advocate. You hear people talk about this all the time. Oh, they're in this big deep water, and I don't believe that. I seldom have seen a real fish deeper than 3 foot of water. 4 would be pushing the envelope. And so when I'm walk fishing, especially on a fast river like the Madison, I'm fishing this much water. I'm fishing the edges, right? I can't get in the middle of that river and fish back.
Right.
And so I'm fishing upstream. I like the fact that with a floating line, it goes past me when I'm bringing the line in. I'm not stepping on it like a sinking line. And, obviously a 6 is going to be, I hesitant to ever say the word softer, because we got into this mindset of fast rods, 25 years ago, and people will think that a soft rod means it's, doesn't have any guts. It's not. Obviously, if you drop a weight, the rod's got to flex more somewhere. And so you could call it soft, or you'd say a different flex zone, but it's just, that's why it would work better with the floating lines, And with a floating line, if you went to a 7, you could probably figure, just to get the weight and all the things that you're talking, grainage and stuff, an extra 20 feet. Well, you don't need the extra 20.
Right.
So it takes something to flex a rod, right?
Yeah.
And so the 6s, and I don't understand it either. My shop's the same way. I sell probably exactly the same number you do. The 6-weights they're a little bit deck fluff sitting there. It's like, try this rod, you'll really like it.
Right.
Well, and a lot of people would be better, honestly, a lot of people would be better with a 6, because they don't load their rods. They don't throw the lines enough to get used to that drift and push. And the 6-weight would make a lot of people better casters. They just don't want to believe that.
Well, and I think the big fear is they're thinking that they're throwing big dungeons or boogeymans, and they think that the 7's going to be better at throwing that than the 6, and it's not necessarily the case.
Quite often it's just the opposite, because they don't flex their rods, and it's, there's a little knack to getting used to it, but it'd be very rare that you'd have to be in a pretty big river where you're going to, on the White or something like that, where you're going to launch maybe a little bit more line, and then it would help. But for most anything, even in Montana, the 6 would be just fine. But
Reeling tip.
Hello, so I hooked on a nice bonefish that turned out to be a fighter. It took a lot of fly line out and almost got to my backing. When I was reeling in, my fly line was accumulated on the left side of my reel until it got stuck. I literally had to open the spool and put it back in fast because the whole line was distributed on the left side. We don't know how to prevent that from happening. Okay, here's an actual sentence. How can I have my fly line smoothly even on my fly reel when I reel back in? Question mark. Oh, thank you. And Santiago goes on, thank a lot for your time. And just kidding, man. Periods are overrated, although it does help me.
You don't need to take a breath when you read it.
Yeah, but I was almost out of breath. Yeah, Santiago, there's a real easy solution. We've done a video on this before. I forget where we did it, but maybe our neighborhood editor there can figure it out and put a link up here or down in the description. But anyhow, yeah, we have shown this. I think we were with Blaine in Virginia. When you're reeling in, okay, when you've got a fish on the line, remember to keep your attention to your side, one side or the other. We fight a fish with the butt of the rod. You're gonna use your pinky, okay? Your pinky, there we go. You're not that big of a fish. You're gonna use your pinky to move the line back and forth on the spool as you're reeling in, okay? You should always do this. So your pinky just your pinky does this, moves back and forth, okay? Even if you have to practice that at home, do pinky exercises so that you can move. It's just like on a bait caster. You know, you've got that, I don't know what they call it, but the thing that moves back and forth to distribute the line, well, your pinky serves as that, and your pinky just moves the line back and forth and keeps it from piling up on one side of the reel or the other.
Fishing with bright colored fly lines.
I have a question I was hoping you can answer for me. I notice you use orange fly line in your videos. Is this just so we can see the line easier as you show various techniques, or do you use orange fly line when fishing? It seems logical to me that perhaps a moss green color would be less conspicuous to the fish. Does it make any real difference what color I use? Well, Terry, this is a subject we have talked about quite a bit, but we still appreciate your question and always happy to answer, which we answer all questions. You see me using the bright orange fly line along with this bright yellow rod for teaching. But when you see me fish, in most cases, I am fishing with a bright orange fly line. And there's probably tons and tons of videos and tons of footage of me actually fishing, yes, with a bright orange fly line. Some cases where I have not used a bright orange fly line was probably because the taper line that I wanted was not available in orange. But trust me, if it's available in orange, I'm using the brightest fly line I can. And we learned this many, many years ago from our friend Flip Palette, who designed this particular line from Cortland. But we also worked with scientific anglers over the past couple years on a project called Project Orange. And that's where we basically convinced scientific anglers to make some of their more popular line tapers in bright orange, because so many people are starting to realize how important this bright orange fly line is, or at least a line color you can see. Your logical sense tells you that the fish is going to be less inclined to see a moss green color. But I want you to remember three things. First and foremost, the most important part about casting, one of the most important parts about delivery and then manipulating your fly on the water is being able to see your fly line. The worst case scenario is that you can't see your fly line. So I know it's counterintuitive, but man, this bright orange fly line is an absolute godsend. I can't hardly fish without it. And then I'll tell you two things. First thing came from Lefty Cray. He said, fly line color does not spook fish. Bad casting spooks fish. And you know what? I mean, that's been proven time and time again. And then our good friend Flip Palette, Flip says, doesn't matter what the fly line color is. He said, just don't show it to them. Yes, we've also had this discussion with our good friend Sean Leeden. When I first started going to the Bahamas with these bright orange lines, they laughed at me and they said, oh, you can't fish for bonefish with a bright orange fly line. I said, well, just I'm going to. And now Sean Leeden, his brother, all the guides at the Andros Island Bonefish Club, they absolutely love these bright orange fly lines because it helps them.
Yeah, so for the past 6 years now, I've been telling my clients, all of my anglers, about using bright colored lines, so it enables them to see exactly the position to where I'm pointing to that target. So having a bright colored line, even when you're false casting, you can gauge the amount of line that you're using to be able to present the adequate length you need to your target. So using bright colored lines enable you to see as an angler your distance and the target that your guide is showing you.
Another thing, Sean, too, is with that bright colored line, when you can see the end of your line, and then you see what the end of the line is doing.
Correct.
And
correct.
whatever the end of your line is doing, your fly is doing.
Doing the exact same deal.
Just 9, 10, 12 foot away, however
Correct.
long your leader is.
Correct. And you can follow suit with your fish once he's coming onto your fly, because once you can see the end of your line, you know exactly where the position of your fly is, and so you'll know exactly where your target is. Oftentimes, you're not able to see these fish. They're somewhat translucent in the water, but the moment they begin to follow your fly, you can see that shadow start to, follow behind your line. So you'll see that.
Yeah.
That's important.
Last thing I want is a clear fly line.
No, you don't want to use that, man.
No.
You don't want to use that.
They can direct you to the fish better when your fly line lands. They can tell you what to do because they know what the fly's doing, because the fly's doing exactly what the tip of the fly line is doing. And if they can't see the tip of your fly line, there's no way they can know what the fly is doing.
3 useful knots for beginners.
My question is, how many knots do I really need to know? Can 1 or 2 get the job done? As a newbie, it's a little intimidating, and I am hoping to simplify the learning process. Wayne Vartabedian. I think I said that right. All right, Wayne. Yes, as a newbie, there's one simple connection, and there's basically 2 or 2.5 knots that you need to learn. That's it. Do not be overwhelmed. And I know you go to a lot of these beginner classes and they try to teach you 6 or 8 different knots, and it's not true. The first connection you need to know is you need to how to attach a leader to the tip of your fly line. And as a beginner, we always recommend that you stick with loops. A lot of fly lines come with a welded loop in the end, and for simplicity, because you are gonna have to be changing leaders fairly often, just do a loop-to-loop connection as a beginner. If you wanna learn a different way and sometimes better way to do this, we'll get to that. Plenty of videos, we'll talk about that more in the future. But please know there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. Okay, you must go line through leader. So you put the fly line through the loop in the leader first. A lot of people, and it's amazing to me how many shops we get these outfits, the entry-level outfits that we sell, and they do it the wrong way. They go leader through line, and for some reason that's everybody's inclination to put the leader loop through the line first, and that is absolutely wrong. That creates what's called a girth hitch or a cutting hitch, and it will cut right into that loop on your fly line. Do it the right way. Line through leader, and then you simply take the leader and come through the loop in the line. Pull the leader through, even if it has knots in it, like mine does, you can do that, and then you're gonna get a perfect handshake looking square knot connection. So it's not even a knot, it's a simple connection that a kindergartner or less can easily do. Hello? Somebody calling in with a question. See, we appreciate that. We appreciate the calls. We appreciate your questions. And then you need 1 knot to attach tippet. When you cut back a leader and you're adding a fly, you get 1 fly caught in a tree, you're shortening your tippet. At some point, you're going to have to add some tippet to your leader, and you want to use a knot called a surgeon's knot. Super simple. It's easier than tying your shoes. It's an overhand knot twice. We do, of course, have a video on how to do it, probably linked right there. And if you can't see that on your device, go down into the description below me and there's a link to our video on how to tie the surgeon's knot. Then to attach your fly, you need a clinch knot. Super, super easy. Come through the eye 5 times around and then through that original loop right next to the eye of the fly. Could not be easier, okay? Remember that we use clinch knots and not the misnamed improved clinch knot. And then another knot that you may want to learn, and that's called the non-slip loop knot. A non-slip loop knot puts a loop right next to your fly and can allow for greater mobility. We use non-slip loops for a lot of, say, streamers or bait fish where we want a lot of action. For standard dry flies, nymphs, and just basic, say, bluegill fishing, a clinch knot is fine. But again, there's a link to the clinch knot. There's a link to the non-slip loop knot. If you can't see it there, click down below me and you'll see it there.
Wind knots.
But a lot of questions recently about why folks are getting knots in their leaders or even knots in their fly line. And this is a common problem that a lot of folks have, and it's not just beginners. I mean, a lot of intermediate and advanced anglers have this. It's amazing how much we see this problem. Those knots are lovingly referred to as wind knots, which, as Lefty Cray used to say, wind knots happen even when there's no wind. They're not caused by wind. Somebody just decided to call it a wind knot at some point. They're caused by tailing loops. A tailing loop is when the fly line comes under itself as you're coming forward. In other words, instead of that loop going out over top of itself, that loop closes and it causes a tailing loop. And that's what causes your wind knots, okay? And tailing loops are actually easy to fix. And there's kind of two main reasons that tailing loops happen, and one leads to another. And the first way that tailing loops happen, and the most common, is that you're coming forward too soon. I often refer to this, you've heard me say this, it's premature evacuation of the backcast or the upcast. You're not waiting long enough, you're coming forward, or some people call it creep. So instead of stopping and letting the line stretch or straighten out behind you, or even dropping your wrist slightly backwards to wind up like a baseball pitcher, instead of those things, you're coming forward prematurely. And then what can happen is that causes you no longer feel the load in the rod. It causes you then to overpower that forward cast, which makes it even worse and can actually tie a knot in your fly line if you're not careful. A tailing loop is caused by coming forward too soon, which can also make you force or push that forward cast. You never want to force anything. As our good friend Sean Leeden often says, it's calm, assertive energy. You let the line straighten out behind you, or almost straighten out completely, and then you slowly drag it forward and bring it to a nice abrupt stop coming forward. Don't force it or push it. So think about it this way. If you creep forward too soon during the stroke, that's like a baseball pitcher trying to throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball from his ear, okay? Of course, you're gonna have to overpower it, causing the end of that loop to cross over the standing part of the loop, again, causing that tailing loop. You don't want to come forward too soon or creep forward too soon. You're going to get a tailing loop every time. It's easy to fix. If you're getting tailing loops and you're getting knots in your leader or your fly line, go outside right now, practice your cast, and make sure that you don't come forward too soon. Nobody likes premature evacuation of your upcast.
The fly line Sharpie trick.
Kind of a quick tip. I've had a lot of folks sending me emails trying to determine what their fly line is. The fly line doesn't have a marking, and they couldn't remember when they bought it what that was. So several ways of doing this, and in all fairness, there are some companies that are laser etching the fly line these days. So you can look for that when you buy a line. It's usually in the first 8 or 10 inches or so. You'll see that it's laser etched, and it tells you the brand, tells you the taper, and it tells you the line weight. But if that's not the case, the other way I tend to do it is a lot of times I'll keep the fly box, or the box that it comes in, excuse me, not the fly box. I'll keep the line box that the line came in. Sometimes I'll even cut these out and just kind of keep a file, and that way I remember what line I do own. But another way, and this is an old Indian trick that Flip and Lefty Flip Palette and Lefty Cray taught us many years ago. And this is a brand new high vis flip fly line, which you all know is my favorite fly line. And what you can do, this is an 8-weight, so you can take a Sharpie, and of course I would typically do this after I have it spooled up, but you take a Sharpie, and which I always carry with me in my kit bag. You're gonna find all kinds of uses for Sharpies, and I'm gonna mark this. So I'm always counting away from myself. So I'm gonna put a long mark, and that's gonna designate a 5, and I'll just mark it, kind of roll the fly line as I'm doing that. So that designates 5, and then I'll go 6, 7, and then 8. Of course, as you all know, first thing I'm gonna do when I put this on my reel and then go to rig up, I'm gonna cut that loop off, and I'm gonna snell a butt section on the tip of this line, as I always do. And make sure you get it all the way around, just helps it last quite a bit longer. So there we have 5, 6, 7, 8. That tells me this is an 8-weight line. I left myself enough room to cut off this loop and to snell on my butt section. So my long slash designates 5, and then short slashes are 1. So this is a 5, 6, 7, 8. Obviously, if this was a 6-weight, I'd have 1 long, 1 short. If it were a 10-weight, I'd have 2 longs.
The Bimini twist knot.
So a Bimini twist we primarily use for tying in our backing to attach to the rear loop in a fly line. Anytime you're fishing big game, saltwater, say 6-weight and up, it's the much preferred connection. It's also called a 20 times around knot, and it scares the pants off a lot of people, but it's super, super easy. So the first thing I do is I form a loop. Okay, I just fold the end of the backing over, form a loop, and I put my hand inside that loop as such, and I'm gonna go around 20 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And I've got my little knot tensioners right here. You can also put this over your knee, which we have shown in another video. But for now, the stiffeners. And then I hold tight on the standing end with my left hand. I hold on the tag end with my right hand. Now, I put my thumb on top of that tag end, and I'm gonna reach up into the crux of that loop. And then what that does is it opens this angle until it's to where it's obtuse. And then I'm gonna start to, with my index finger, I pull the loop towards me. And as I do that, that tag end jumps right over and starts to wrap over top of the rear end of the loop. Having your wraps slightly apart and then get them tighter and tighter as you get closer, and your Bimini is done. I'm gonna throw a half hitch over top of one leg of that loop so it stays in place. And then I'm gonna narrow the loop, and you can do this by putting it around a doorknob or I've moved to one of my tensioners here, and then you're going to throw a uni knot or a Duncan knot over top. I usually do 3 turns, maybe 4 turns, and this just cinches it right up against that Bimini. And friends, it's done. I'm going to trim it, and one final step is I'm going to take a lighter and I'm just going to singe the end of that backing, making sure that I don't burn the knot at all. I just singe the end of that backing, makes sure that it's not going to slip through that uni that you just tied. And now you're ready to loop your fly line on, which of course we've got videos on that. You can also use a Bimini and a leader. We'll talk about that in coming videos. So there you go, down and dirty, real quick, Bimini twist knot.
The Duncan loop knot.
And this is called the Duncan loop knot. The Duncan loop can be used in the butt section of your leader or the midsection of your leader, so you can just loop the tippets on so that butt section remains permanent, or it can also be used to tie on a fly. So put your glasses on first. And you're going to come through the eye of the fly. And as with all knots, leave yourself plenty of tag end. That's one of the big problems people learning how to tie knots. And then we're going to form a loop, okay? And we're not going to cross. We're not going to make this a closed loop. We've just laid those two pieces parallel, so it is not a closed loop. And then we come with the tag end, we come back towards the fly, forming another loop right here. Now, I take this tag end and I come through 3 or 4 times, 3 times with the super heavy stuff, and boom, the knot is essentially tied. Now there's a little trick to how you seat this knot, okay? And I'll put it on some sort of knot tensioner, and then I'll just seat it, of course, lubricate that knot. And then what I'm gonna do, once you've got kind of the knot in place, you can set the length of the loop. For example, when you were tying on a fly, you want to make sure that your loop is shorter than the hook shank. Otherwise, that hook can get caught inside the loop. So we set the length of our loop, and then we're holding on the standing end. We're going to pull on the tag end only to seat this knot. So grab onto it with your pliers. Again, I've set the length, and now you're going to seat it right down using your pliers. And voila, trim it close, and there you have a wonderful, wonderful Duncan loop knot.
Buttoning up your rod.
One of the problems with a hook keeper is if your leader is longer than your rod, then when you tighten up on this, your leader is going to be inside the tip of the rod, and it's going to cause a kink in that part of the leader. And it can be tough to get out. You're going to have to run your fingers over it, maybe even run a leader straightener over. So it's not an optimal situation, but it's also not the end of the world. So if you don't have a hook keeper, you can add that loon hook keeper on there, and then when you go to fish, just click it out of the way, no problem. But here's that better way that I'm talking about. And if you don't have a hook keeper, even if I do have a hook keeper on the rod, this is what I do. And you're gonna put this up on one of the snake guides. And so I'm gonna come up above the stripping guides, and I'm going to put the hook right through that snake guide, okay? It's best to use the snake guides. You don't want that hook through one of your stripping guides, because usually you have ceramic or other materials for the inserts, and you don't want that hook scraping up your inserts. So then all you're going to do is you're going to come around the back side of your reel. Don't come around the spool side, or that leader can slip through in between the spool and the frame. And then you simply tighten it up, and you see that we're not kinking up our leader at all. The leader is now going around the circumference of the reel, so you're not going to get a kink at all there. And then the other added bonus is that you can button this up. And here's how you do this. You take this leader right next to your stripping guide, your first stripping guide, and you come around clockwise, and you go once, and you go twice right around that stripping guide. And now everything's buttoned up. There's no line flopping around anywhere. And if you put this rod in a rod holder, it's much cleaner. Not going to get caught on anything, and especially if you're putting 2, 3, 4 rods together in a boat or the back of your pickup truck, they're not getting tangled up. You know, if you don't do this, you've all done this before, you put 2 or 3 rods in the back of your truck or in the back of your car, and then you pull them out, and it's unbelievable how tangled up, and it takes you a half hour to get them untangled. And now, too, you can just take all of this, come counterclockwise twice, take it out from behind the reel, and now, especially if you're on if you're on the bow of a skiff, now all you have to do is just tap that. It comes right off, and you're ready to cast. Again, let's do that one more time. Super, super easy. You just tap on the rod. So to review, we're going to attach this to the first snake guide above my stripping guides. I'm going to take this leader and I'm going to come around the back side of the reel, not the spool side, kind of tighten it up. Come around your first dripping guide once, twice, and it's all buttoned up. Look at that. Just beautiful. And then you get ready to fish, grab onto that leader, come counterclockwise twice, take it out from behind the reel, point your rod down, just give your rod a tap and it'll come right off and you're ready to make a cast. It's a way better system than a hook keeper anyway.
Casting tips for beginners.
So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the fly line. And it's amazing to me that I run into so many people that do not know why a fly line is 2 colors, sometimes 3 colors. A lot of folks think it's just for aesthetics, and sure, it looks cool. A lot of folks think that it's to gauge distance, which it certainly can help me to gauge distance, but there is a scientific reason, and there's just a bunch of jacks crashing bait over there. But there is a scientific reason why this fly line is multicolored. Now, many of you know that I fish, when I'm fishing warm water, either in the salt or in sweet water, I fish a fly line designed by our great friend Flip Palette and made by Cortland called the High Vis Flip Sight Line. Perfect for sight casting. And the High Vis Flip Sight Line is first of all bright orange up front, and then it's white on the back end. And the bright orange indicates the head of the line, or the weight forward portion of the line. Now that's the fat part. And the white part of the line is the skinny part, the running line. So there is a reason for that color change. And it's very, very important to understand that I must have, in order to pick up, meaning in order to pick up this fly line off the water, I must have the orange inside the tip of my fly rod, okay? So I must have the orange inside. Now I can shoot into the white, of course, and I'm gonna do that very, very often, especially when I'm fishing saltwater. So the orange is inside my rod tip, I pick up, I'm gonna shoot into the white, and always cup your fly line when you shoot so that that doesn't happen. My bad. The fat part of your fly line can pull the skinny white part, but there's no way that the skinny white part can pick up that fat head. If you try to pick up that fat head on the white running line, it's gonna flop around like a wet noodle and just collapse on you just like that. No way can you pick up this fly line on the white part of the running line. So your fly line, and it's not just Cortland, I mean Scientific Anglers, Rio, Airflow, they all make excellent fly lines, and all of them do this mostly on their premium lines. Now, if you don't have a multicolored line, some of the lesser priced lines these days are not multicolored, you can always take a Sharpie, which I always have a Sharpie somewhere close. I keep it in my kit bag. You can take a Sharpie and create a black mark where the head of your fly line ends and the running line starts. And there's 2 ways you can determine where that is. Literally by running your fingers along it, and you can feel where that head ends and the running line, the skinny line starts. And you can also look at the taper diagram. It'll tell you how long the head of that line is, so you can measure it and get a good idea of where that transition is as well. And just take a black mark, I usually make them about yay long, and that way that black mark has to be inside your rod tip in order to make a cast. Another thing I wanted to talk real briefly about is kind of this, something that I've been working on today, and I tend to work on most every day when I fish. And that is with average size flies, average, say medium, average, or even smaller size flies. The method of fly casting that we have shown you, and that Flip Palette and I have shown you in multiple videos, is best often done, especially if you're in a boat, using as little motion as possible. There's none of this heave-ho and back and forth and moving your feet. One of the worst things you can do on the bow of a skiff is to move your feet. So we don't want to move our feet, and we don't want to move our body at all. The more stoic we can be, the more efficient this cast will be, and the more effective the bend of the fly rod will be. So I always try to teach people about this comfortable little work zone right here in front of you. This comfortable little work zone is where you execute the fly cast. It is where you're going to tie knots right here in front of you. It's where, if you tie flies, your vise is going to be set up in this comfortable work zone. Heck, if you do needlepoint or crochet, or notice when you eat dinner tonight where your dinner plate is, it's in that comfortable little work zone about the size of a dinner plate right in front of you. And if you can think about fly casting, and I mean the entire thing, the whole stroke, the haul, and everything, if I can keep that confined to this comfortable little work zone, you're going to be blown away at how much more efficient your cast is, about how much more accurate your fly cast is. Your loops are going to be tighter, the rod's going to do more work for you, and you're not flailing around and giving yourself more of a chance for the fish to detect your motion. You're not rocking the boat, your feet aren't slamming on the deck, and also your feet are less likely to catch on the fly line, or you're less likely to step on the fly line if you leave your feet planted. When you practice fly cast, think about just working, and like I said, even that haul, just work in this comfortable little work zone, and you'll be amazed at how far, how efficient, and how accurate your fly cast will be if you concentrate on working in that comfortable little work zone. Now, there's certainly exceptions to this rule. We've shown you some of those. When you start fishing really big flies, when you start fishing with sinking fly lines, for example, we've done, for example, a couple of videos with Blaine chocolate. Of course, you know the Blaine fishes flies that are like that, and you may have to move the rod a little bit more in order to throw one of those giant flies. But if you're working with average size bass flies, smallmouth flies, panfish flies, and even average redfish flies and such, this comfortable little work zone tip, I think, will greatly, greatly help you in your casting. Just a couple, 3 things that I often have to remind myself. Even though I've been teaching fly casting for now, as of 2024, 36 years of my life, and fishing a lot for more than that, I find that I have to remind myself to do these things, so I don't feel bad giving you all a reminder. And the first thing is that you must start and you must end every cast with your rod tip below your belt. You start with your rod tip at the water level when you go to pick up, and then you wind up with your rod tip at the water level when you go to start your retrieve. So put your rod tip in the water, then start your retrieve, form your loop and make your presentation, and then rod tip back in the water. Many, many years ago, it was probably 1996, and I was working with the late great Lefty Cray. I was a young whippersnapper, and I said to Lefty, Lefty, what's the #1 mistake that beginning fly casters will make? And Lefty said, Brian, everybody wants to start their cast with the rod here. And he was right. It's your inclination to start with the cast here, and then there's nowhere to go. Of course, you're gonna go back with your rod. You're not gonna form a tight loop, and his flip pallet often says you're only making half of a fly cast at that point. A fly cast should act like an airplane taking off a runway, and by putting your rod tip in the water to start, you're making that runway as long as possible for your pilot to take off, okay? So I start with the rod tip in the water, and then I pick up. There's also a video that we did with Flip along those lines about lifting most of the line off the water before you go to form your loop. Check that one out too. It kind of ties into what I'm talking about here. But remember to start with your rod tip low, form your loop, rod tip back down, and now you're ready to start your retrieve. Along those same lines, I talked about this a little bit earlier today. But remember, when you're retrieving a fly, to have your rod tip at the water level or even in the water. Kelly Gallup talks a lot about this streamer fishing. You must have your rod tip in the water. I see so many people retrieving and they'll have their rod tip like this, okay? And look at what the line's doing. I'm creating slack, and we all know that slack is bad in any kind of contact fly fishing like this. And not to mention, when my rod tip is up like that and the line is bouncing, not only am I losing control, but that line is slapping the water and I'm alerting the fish to the fact that I'm there and doing what I'm doing. And we almost never want to do that, okay? So start with your rod tip in the water, end with it in the rod tip in the water, and keep it there as you retrieve that fly. Don't bring it up here and do this bouncing trick with the fly line. It's amazing how many people I see doing that. And last but not least today, just a reminder, move your thumb to the end of the cork grip. I'm telling you friends, I have seen so many people greatly improve their casting just by moving their thumb to the end of the cork grip. Watch videos and watch how many people are casting with their thumb back here. Remember what they taught you in Little League Baseball? They taught you to choke up on the bat because you got higher bat speed. Well, choking up on the fly rod is going to give you higher tip speed. It's going to give you much greater control over where the tip goes. And we all know that the tip is what forms the loop. And your loop is of utmost importance. So move that thumb to the end of the cork grip. That's why I love these super flared out cork grips. You know, Echo's doing them, Sage is doing some. I think Loomis has some. One of my favorite fly rods right here, y'all know the Echo Prime, and it's got this fantastic flared out cork grip out up front, and my thumb just fits, and it's just push button. Like just opening a screen door, boom, and it goes right to the target. So move that thumb to the end of the cork grip and you're gonna see your accuracy and your efficiency just go through the roof, I promise you.
Flip palette on casting in the wind.
Take it away, Maestro.
So here's, many people are able to, when they have a hard wind blowing on their casting shoulder, they're able to cast backwards to fish. I've never been able to do that. It takes my concentration away from the fish. It changes my normal casting style so much that it makes it difficult for me. So I've come up with another way of doing it. I actually learned this from a guide in the Keys. This is all going to shit, guys. So I learned this little thing from a guide in the Keys about 60 years ago named Woody Sexton. A brilliant guide, one of the early pioneer guides. And the way I accomplish this cast, when the wind is hard on my right shoulder, my casting shoulder, I simply break my wrist slightly, ever so slightly, in toward my body as I make my cast. And what that does is it causes the rod tip to be right over the top of my head as I cast, and the wind then blows the loop past the left side of my body as I cast. All I'm doing is my regular cast. I'm just breaking my wrist slightly inboard toward my own body. And you can see how the line passes on the left side of my body. Everybody in the boat is safe. I haven't taken my eyes off of the fish. I'm still doing my normal cast, and everybody is safe, including me. This even works with heavily weighted flies. I can still keep my focus on the fish as I make my cast, and that's all there is. Just the slight break of the wrist, which causes 9 feet away, causes the tip to go over my head instead of over here where my loop passes on the right side of my body. Now it's on the left side of my body, downwind.
Well, when you taught me that many years ago, and this is often a revelation for our students in our schools when you show this to them, and it's like, oh my gosh, how simple is that? Why didn't I think of this?
Yeah, you don't care how hard the wind blows.
No.
It doesn't matter.
No, because then it's putting it on the opposite side of you. You don't care how far it blows. Well, and I used to do that. I used to, wind blowing hard at my casting shoulder, I used to reach way out to compensate so that it didn't get blown into me.
You lost your track.
I lost my track. I think, where have I heard that before? Tracking.
Yeah.
I lost my track, and then you're moving your body in ways that you don't normally move your body. And so what you're proposing is we don't change anything. We just angle our wrist in a little bit, put the rod tip over the top of your head, and the line goes on the other side. You've said it 1,000 times, the wind
Is your friend.
is your friend. So there you have it, friends.